and welcome to BronxTalk. Happy New Year to all our friends and neighbors in the Bronx. Tonight, we take a look back at the best of BronxTalk in 2023. Let's start with one of the most unique programs we've ever done, as we visited the Bronx Museum in February for their Swagger and Tenderness exhibit of Bronx people, depicted in the remarkable sculptures by John Ahern and Rigoberto Torres. In this segment of our tour, they describe the eye-opening process that they use to create enduring artwork. Take a look. One of the themes that you're going to see here is family, and it turns out, and I had no idea, Rigo, this is your family?
Yes, Edwin is...
Okay, well, that's right. We should introduce, ladies and gentlemen, it's Margaret and Edwin.
And this idea came, I decided to cast Edwin and his wife because we were trying to save the pregnancy part. And as a family member he got like 5 kids extra, in his family. So I said, okay, let's do this piece separate, by itself.
And many of the pieces here, which we're going to see, are about family, of your families. One we're going to see later, of your wife and child. And Rigo's got his whole family around the whole
This fortune teller that you see behind you, that's also a member of the family.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
If you would, John, there's a video that gets shown here at the museum that describes the process.
Yes.
Talk to me about, because I watched it and it's just unbelievable. You took a young man, you placed him on a table, you stuck straws in his nose so he could breathe. Describe that process of how that works.
Well, we were coming out of the 70s period when I thought of Polaroids as the perfect example how to compare what we were doing, because we were making quickie impressions of people.
And so what do? You poured plaster all over him. Describe that whole thing.
Well, once you have the straws in the nose and you have someone is somewhat ready to be covered, you would throw a whole bowl of this pour down over their faces.
Alginate.
And alginate, yes.
Okay.
And yes, and
how long would it have to stay like that?
not too long, like maybe 15, 20 minutes.
So whoever was under there was breathing through a straw.
Yes.
And covered over. Then what would you do? You lift up.
You have a thing we call the mother mold of plaster bandages went on top of that to give it support, so it would hold the shape of this alginate. And then when that's set up, it would see the hands. Imagine this being the cast. The person would sit up, and this would fall away from their face.
And then you would pour something in that mold. Plaster in that mold, and
yes.
That would create the basis for your work.
That would be the basis for the work, yes.
One of the things you see here are her eyes, which are beautiful, and his eyes, you got the color of the eyes. The eyes you do separate because he couldn't have his eyes open.
Yes, exactly, yes. We always encourage people to have their eyes closed.
and the beautiful thing, one of the many beautiful things, the beautiful thing in that video is that you gave it to his mom.
Yes.
And
Juanito.
Yes. So now, Rigoberto, you couldn't have had the two of them together and covered them with plaster. And in many of the other ones we're going to see, they're not in position like this where they're just, like a headshot. How do you do that and create the likeness?
The face separate. Both for the face separate.
So you did that process with the face?
Yeah. And then the rest was just the way you see it.
And so what is this made of? This is acrylic on plaster.
Yeah.
And you use different materials all the time?
This it has pipes, burlap. It's got a couple other stuff in it to keep it in shape.
Just one step back before we go, because we're going to see many more pieces. John, romance the Bronx a little bit. Let's just talk about, this must be special to have everything that you've done for decades here at the Bronx Museum. Must be exciting.
It's a profound, moving experience for me, and I am so grateful for everyone that you see and all the people that you don't see that worked with us for decades. I'm so grateful that they gave everything they had to us to help us make these pieces.
I'm going to ask you each, for this particular one, what's your favorite thing? I'm going to tell you, we talked about her eyes. We realized that she's pregnant. The pink sneakers drive me crazy. That is, talk about swagger and tenderness. But what do you like?
These hands right
the
here.
Hands. You
and
like,
these hands. I like the two pairs of hands.
and for you?
Same, the hands, yeah. It's
Because you see the way that the hand reverses. His hand on top, her hand on top.
We're going to go look at something that I felt like these are the people in my building. So let's go. We'll go to the next spot. Also in February, we took a close look at the female majority in the New York City Council with Council member Amanda Farias and the executive director of the new majority, Jessica Haller. During this segment, you can see one of the most ingenious responses to a question that I've ever gotten in the almost 30 years of hosting Bronx Talk. See if you can pick it out. The Bronx and Brooklyn, and we'll get both of you to respond to this, have the highest rates of severe maternal morbidity, life-threatening conditions during pregnancy. What do you do about that? Now that it's a personal issue to more of the council members, what do you do about that, and where are we at? And you're next on the same question.
Sure. So we actually answered directly to tackle that head on. We've invested more money and more policy services around doula services, around birthing initiatives within our boroughs, specifically in Brooklyn and the Bronx. And we've prioritized what does reporting look like. So we've amended some of this reporting mechanisms that we have in the city.
Reporting meaning keeping track of the data.
Yeah, DOHMH reporting
Right.
that comes back to us. We can actually evaluate what's happening in real time versus in the past where we've seen where maybe more male-dominated councils have had 10-year backlog data that we were utilizing to address maternal health care, and specifically how Black maternal health care has been getting worse year after year. We now have updated reporting and updated data that's annual that we're reviewing to make sure that we're getting the services to the communities that are most in need.
You know, I'm just curious, and again, I'm going to get back to you about the about this issue, but because you said that male-dominated council might not have understood this. It's, you know, is it kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Is it because they just don't understand or it never occurred to them? I mean, I don't think that anybody would be mean about it, so to speak, or prejudiced about it. It's kind of an organic thing, I suppose, is the way to describe it.
I think at this table you might be the best person to answer that, but generally, yeah,
I would have to be told about the seriousness
I
of it.
do think that, you know, you do policy, you focus priority, yes, on community issues, but typically from your lens, right? So it's not to say that there aren't
Somebody
men.
was being evil about it.
Yeah, it's not to say that men are not focusing on women and children, but it is to say that they're not experiencing it on the day-to-day, right? It's not happening to them wholly all the time. And so when you do have more women in office, you do see just a change a bit of, yes, we're talking about ensuring healthcare access, but we're also talking about what does birthing experience look like and why are doula services necessary? Or we have a year-long plus usually on gynecological services for women. How do we open up those doors? Things like that
might not have been understood.
That might not understood.
So your point of view about, is this, let's say, a leading issue for the group? I mean, is this one of the things that you put right up at the top of the list?
Many of our candidates and the women that we've supported are elevating this issue in the council today, and even some of the candidates who I know are not in council, this was one of their leading issues. The new majority NYC supports candidates who demonstrate support for our bottom line issues. One of the things we've been talking about, issues that feel like women's issues, childcare, healthcare, reproductive rights, but we feel really strongly that a whole host, economic development, standing up against bigotry against minority people, justice in all forms, are all support women, right? If you don't have economic development, it's the women that are going to suffer from that.
I want to talk about this unanimity, so to speak. Does this, and the issues that you mentioned and the issues that the council member mentioned kind of lean toward progressivism, if you will.
They do.
But as you know, 15 council members just left the Progressive Caucus, including Marjorie Velasquez and Diana Ayala, both have representation in the Bronx. The issue is over police accountability and funding. Does this hurt the ability for new majority to lay out a platform?
New Majority NYC is nonpartisan. In 2021, the organization endorsed 74 candidates in 35 districts, including a Republican. We've had Republican applicants this time around. You can be Republican and still demonstrate support for building resilient New York City, and which is one of our bottom line issues, and still be a Republican and demonstrate support for reproductive rights in some respect. So we're often lumped in as quote unquote a more progressive organization, but the range of values in the women reflect the demographics of the districts that we are working with the women in.
Councilmember, how do you feel about not only having your colleagues leave the Progressive Caucus, but even just let's digress a moment about this police funding issue, which is right in the center of the debate in the council right now?
Yeah, I think progressivism isn't a monolith, right? We each are elected by the body that's within the voting base that's within our communities, and we have to, be able to legislate and build budgetary priorities and communicate, really message our issues out to our local communities. And so, I think it's important for people to feel how they can best represent their community is how they can, do that through whatever caucus they're organizing out of. There are many caucuses in the council. We're a Democratic majority. There are other ways to organize outside of just caucuses. And in terms of the language that we have in Progressive Caucus about reducing the size and scope of the NYPD, the way I think majority of us view that is when we take examples in the PD budget, like moving traffic enforcement or school safety officers out of our schools and into the DOE, or out of traffic enforcement and into DOT, that's actually reducing the size and scope of the NYPD.
Without cutting a budget.
Well, it will actually cut budget as well, right? Because if we're moving whole divisions to other areas that are maybe more reflective of what they should be governing, it's actually streamlining the way that our precincts can focus in on the work that they need to do to keep our communities safe.
I guess there was great enthusiasm for the reparation concepts and the state's legalization of cannabis. But all of that was threatened by the many illegal cannabis shops that opened up in the Bronx and all over the city. This was the discussion on BronxTalk in April. Is this related to I used the word prohibition in my introduction. Is this related to prohibition so that you made sure that all the alcohol is sold by licensed operators, and that you don't have people cooking it up in their living rooms, which would not be legal, et cetera, et cetera? Is this a similar kind of thing?
Well, of course. But remember, in the South, people still do their liquor. Again, that is not the word here. Nobody's opening up illegal liquor stores or restaurants without liquor licenses. So that's what we have to get to in cannabis, is that if you're going to open up a shop, you got to go through the process.
Here's a list of a couple of things. Number one, as you mentioned, the items are not quality controlled. Many times they're laced with other drugs, and we know how dangerous those could be, especially if you don't know what's in them. Kids think the gummies are candy if kids get a hold of it. They even say, this I wasn't aware of, but my research showed that it undermines the state's medicinal uses for cannabis, because people think, I'll just go to the guy down my block. And the other thing, which is a really big thing, is the safety and security of it. There was a raid on West 181st Street. Cops said they seized about $73,000 worth of untaxed goods. A man was killed in a Harlem pot shop recently. There have been all kinds of different crimes. I went by, and we have a picture of it, and we were talking about it before the show. I went by one store where they said these premises are armed right on the front door. That is not a way to have a peaceful, law-abiding society, I would think.
No, it's not.
Maybe I'm stating the obvious.
I don't even know what the legality is of having people
Announced that they have armed or even
inside these
announced.
locations. I don't even know if that's within the MRTA for that to be legal, especially in an unlicensed location. So that's very concerning, right? So and where we're going to feel it the most, and hopefully Cavite would agree, is in the outer boroughs, right? In the Bronx, in Brooklyn.
Well, we don't have any licensed dispensaries.
But when
yet.
they do, because in Manhattan, there's always going to be tourism. There's always going to be, so those shops will find a way to do well. In the outer boroughs is what it will worry me, right? Because if you have to compete on your same block with 3 or 4 other illegal dispensaries that are not paying the taxes you do, that are not paying the bud tenders the way you do, and are not giving people the right information the way you would be, I think at the end of the day, the consumer loses and the city loses.
Ms. Pauria Sanchez, let's just talk about the competition. If they're taking in if they have $73,000 worth of untaxed cigarettes, vape products, cannabis flower and edibles and the whole thing, how can the legal folks keep up with that? I mean, they can stock their stores, but these guys are pumping it out there, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that I recently heard actually a medical marijuana company say there's actually enough room in the market for everybody. That there
that's
isn't.
interesting.
Yeah, for many
Do you
shops. I do. I think we really will be the global capital of cannabis, and a huge portion of that is because we're such a tourist capital, right? Globally. Of course, I'm not an economist, but I do that seems to be borne out by the market demand. What I think we should be talking about is how do we transition these shops to being legal? How do we educate the shops around the consequences of what they're doing and support them in getting onto a legal path? And it's not that simple.
So you're a social scientist, not a financial scientist. I can appreciate that.
And it's not that easy to become legal. It's actually very, very challenging. And so we really do need to be sure we're supporting people in doing that well. And by we, I do mean the city and state government needs to be providing tens of millions of dollars in technical assistance, business development support. It is incredibly complicated.
Oh, but you wouldn't I'm assuming you wouldn't give that support to the people who have those shops.
Yeah.
Certainly to start, you would only give that to the people who have the 16 Bronx operators who received licenses.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And that's actually the other point I wanted to make is the other threat we see here is that we want to be sure legacy operators and other folks who were directly impacted by the war on drugs, that they are prioritized, right, by that sort of investment by the state. And we don't want to recriminalize a whole new set of communities, some of whom are immigrants, right?
Since BronxTalk debuted 29 years ago, we've moderated 94 Bronx political debates, but we never saw anything like what happened at the end of the October debate for the 13th Council District between incumbent Democrat Marjorie Velasquez and Republican challenger Christy Marmorato, who got into a shouting match right as the program ended. Their disagreement continued into the studio as they both walked off the set, still arguing, before the show was actually over. Not only will we show you the end of the program as viewers saw it tonight, but we'll add a couple of clips that were shot in the studio by our crew that indicates the two candidates were still sparring after the show.
I'm a woman of my word. I have never turned my back to my community. I am not funded by large corporations or unions. The only person that I am going to answer to is you, the community. If this is what you want in a council person, then vote for Christy Marmorato. Thank you, and thank you, Gary, for having me here today.
Sure. Ms. Velasquez, your final comments?
Thank you, Gary, for tonight, and thank you, every viewer, for watching tonight. It's been a complete honor to represent District 13 since January of 2022. I'm the daughter of the Bronx, born and raised here to Puerto Rican parents, to a community that has delivered to my dad a job and the American dream. The dream that actually got me here, the dream that put me to go into St. Catherine's, where they delivered care and compassion. And using that care and compassion, I was able to deliver food,
30
PPE,
seconds.
and pantry items to our families in need during COVID. And now it's led me to deliver record funding to our NYPD for public safety, record funding to our hospitals for care, and record funding
15
to our
seconds.
schools for quality education for our kids. What we're talking about is delivering not only results, but it's delivering hope, not hate, not divisiveness, and certainly not fear. This seat was never handed to me. I don't get
Time.
anything because my brother was there or because
Oh,
my husband
God.
wanted me to.
You
But at
put
the
your-
end of the
Thank
day,
you.
I fought against
your
the
husband
establishment
was
to get where I am.
walking for the
So
mayor
thank
the
you for
first
that
year
Thank
you
you.
were put
chance.
into
Candidates.
office. So knock
you.
it off.
Well, candidates, while you might not
work for the
agree
Board of
on
Elections.
everything, and the
Yeah, you're
dialogue
going to
will
talk about the Board of
undoubtedly
Elections.
continue
Let's see
going.
what's going to happen there.
I know you
Yeah,
will
I know
all-
you guys changed, right? Or your
Changed?
husband,
All right.
your
Let's
husband
see.
employees
Folks,
get money that
we
they don't
gotta-
remember
Yeah.
giving?
I don't.
Cash?
We
How
gotta
dare
get
you
going.
make those allegations against
I don't
me?
know. It's in the Daily News. I didn't make an
yeah, well, watch
allegation.
what's gonna come out.
We
Daily
are
News
going to
next. How
thank all
dare
of the
you. You are
participants.
such a snake.
Please
You are more
also
than a snake
thank
that-
our friends at the League of Women Voters from the city of New York. And we thank both candidates. And obviously the dialogue will go on. And we'll remind everybody to vote on November 7th for the candidate of their choice. We'll be back next week with a fun show. Totally different. We're going to do a circus show because there's a circus coming to Bay Plaza. We'll do that next week. Good night.
How dare you? Okay. Don't act like a
Great job, everyone.
nonsense. My husband's livelihood is at stake with the lies. Okay, I have a child and a family.
We're not.
You can roll your eyes, but if we're gonna.
It should be noted that the election was won by Marmorato, who became the first Republican elected in the Bronx in 20 years. In our final Best of 2023 segment, we turn to the world stage for the war in the Middle East. Our dialogue featured a Bronx Muslim and a Bronx Jewish leader. Take a look. Here you're seeing Palestinian people being blown up in the worst conditions imaginable. At minimum, even if you're going to continue to, seek out Hamas, shouldn't there be humanitarian aid for those folks?
Number one, there should have never ever been October 7 to begin with. Number two, immediately after the tragedy, we had leadership meeting organized at the mayor's office. And unfortunately, as leaders, our responsibility, our moral responsibility was a unified condemnation of October 7 occurrence.
Okay.
And sympathize with the victims and then send our condolences and then distance completely ourselves from those who were part of October 7,
Okay.
regardless of what had happened before. Had we done that as Muslim community, as leaders, we knew 100% what was done on October 7 will never, ever, get Israeli response, appropriately. It will be overreaction because
Which is what you're seeing.
Which is what is happening.
But my
So-
point is
so-
now,
so- so-
shouldn't they at least work with the United States government and provide humanitarian aid?
Obviously, it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with the Palestinians or Israelis. Killing and deaths are not acceptable, are not welcome by anybody else. But we have to also understand the nuances of the situation. There are a lot more to it than most of us know. And unless you're on the ground and you see what's at stake, then your language will be different. Calling for ceasefire is beautiful, and no death should be permitted. No death should be celebrated. But this situation is so complex that I think we have to leave it to those that, number one, have access to decision making, number two, have understanding of what is happening. But it is not as simple as just calling for one thing.
I want to
Please
jump. I
add,
want to
yes.
jump in on that. I think we need to ask Hamas if they're going to do it again. Is this their plan of action?
Yeah.
Are you going? I think the trauma of a society that this happened to is deep, and the fear is that Hamas, once they've sort of licked their wounds a little bit, will come and do this again. So, is anyone asking Hamas to back off from their notion of destruction of the state of Israel?
I think that would be a question that would not receive.
This river to the sea stuff. When you begin to talk to and unpack it with folks, you have to say, like, excuse me, what about the folks who are living there right now? These millions of Jews, Israelis, both as Jews and Arab Israelis, because remember, it wasn't just Jewish Israelis that were held hostage or killed. There were foreign nationals from Thailand. There were other Arabs that were killed as well. So the question is Hamas going to back off from its pledge to destroy the state of Israel?
And I have to say, is Netanyahu going to back off his objection to a two-state solution?
I believe that is our only solution at this point in time.
I was going to
is
ask
a
that.
two-state solution.
That concludes our Best of 2023. It's been an amazing year on Bronx Talk, and we look forward to another journey with you all in 2024. Thanks, of course, to producer Rebecca Hemick, our three directors, William Guzman, Nick Marrero, and Joe Boonchan. Also, thanks to the cast of thousands who work with us in the studio each week. And, of course, to you, the people of the Bronx who make it all so worthwhile. So if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll see you again next week. Good night. Happy New Year, folks.